What if reality branches quietly every time you blink? We will start small and let the smallest experiment set our compass. Hold that idea gently as we step from everyday intuition into careful, testable physics. You and I will begin with superposition, which here just means overlapping possibilities. Picture a coin, not simply heads or tails, but both at once until disturbed. Think of it like multiple radio stations broadcasting simultaneously, until you tune your receiver to pick up just one clear signal. You might wonder how anything can be two ways at once without breaking logic. The trick is that superposition carries information like a woven pattern, not separate loose threads. When you poke it clumsily, the pattern unwinds and one strand becomes all you see. To ground that, imagine a tiny particle passing through a barrier with two thin gaps. If you look too coarsely, you imagine it choosing one gap or the other. But when left alone, its pattern shows interference, meaning both paths coexist and jostle each other. You may ask where the other path goes when you finally check the screen. Here is the first honest answer, stated plainly and carefully. It does not go anywhere. The act of checking forces the pattern to present only one stable face to you. This brings us to the measurement problem, a name for the when and why of settling. In plain words, it asks how fuzzy possibilities become a single outcome in your notebook. It is not mystical. It is a question about timing, interactions, and information. You deserve power here, not hand-waving, so take an agency line early. Understanding the rules lets you predict what you can control and what you cannot. When you know the levers, you stop fearing the machine and start driving it on purpose. The rule that converts patterns into probabilities is called the Born rule. In everyday terms, it says the brighter parts of the pattern show up more often over many trials. Think of raindrops landing where the storm clouds are thickest in the sky. Before we carry this forward, I would love your take. If you could fund one clean test of parallel universes, what would it be and why? Share your best idea below so we can surface the smartest questions together. Now, many worlds enters as a clean way to avoid abrupt mystical collapse. It says the pattern never actually shatters. It simply becomes many non-talking versions through interactions. Those versions are called branches, like trails that fork and never meet again. You might worry this multiplies realities without restraint, like copies from a cheap printer. The formal idea is quieter and more disciplined than that picture. It is just the usual smooth math applied to everything, with no special exception for looking. Decoherence is the workhorse that makes branching feel like settling. In plain language, it is environmental jostling that forces alternatives to stop interfering. Imagine two singers starting in perfect unison, then drifting apart so far their voices never blend again. You can test the spirit of decoherence with any fragile arrangement at home. Bump a delicately balanced mobile and the coordinated motion falls into separate sways. The pattern has not vanished. It has spread into the air, the table, and your fingertips. Entanglement is the partner concept, meaning two systems share one joint description. Learn something about one, and you reduce uncertainty about the other immediately. It is not a phone call. It is a single book with two chapters written in mutual ink. You might ask whether that rapid knowledge transfer sends a usable signal faster than light. The careful answer is no, because you cannot control which chapter outcome you will read. The correlations show up only when you later compare both journals honestly. If superposition and entanglement sound abstract, anchor them with a kitchen analogy. Think of batter that holds many flavors before baking, each ready to dominate. Once the oven heat hits, the flavors commit, and cake slices no longer trade tastes. Many worlds says the universe is like that batter evolving without a special oven. The heat is every little nudge from dust, air, and light that records which flavor wins locally. Those records scatter, and alternative flavors can no longer remix in your experience. You might wonder who counts as you when branches multiply. A simple way to speak is this: you are the trail of memories that continues smoothly through interactions. Where memories divide, there are now several trails, each remembering a single clear story. Does this make free will evaporate, like steam from a kettle left too long? That fear fades when you notice your choices still steer your local trail. Like a sailor choosing a tack, you still shape the waters you actually sail. You may ask where evidence would hide if branches cannot talk across the divide. Excellent question, because good science names the limits of detection before making claims. Evidence shows up indirectly by checking whether collapse rules are ever needed at all. In laboratory practice, the standard math explains everything without needing to add special collapse rules. Experiments push larger and warmer systems to show quantum patterns before they fray. The bigger the success, the more comfortable we become with branching as the quiet default. Think of it like engineering a suspension bridge and gradually adding heavier trucks. If the bridge holds under real traffic, you trust the design more deeply. Likewise, as quantum patterns persist in tougher setups, branch-first explanations earn respect. You might worry that probabilities become meaningless if every outcome happens somewhere. The practical fix is to tie probability to expectation for your future memories. The weight of a branch measures how often a future you should bet on seeing it. That sounds philosophical, so let us keep it concrete and test-friendly. If the weights predict betting rates that match repeated experiments, the account holds water. If not, it needs repair. The same way mispriced insurance collapses under many claims. You deserve a clear picture of what counts as a branch in practice. Branching happens when decoherence kills interference between alternatives to any useful precision. It is not a magical pop. It is a graceful fade below a measurable threshold. Imagine dancers on a dim stage wearing glow bands that trace their steps. When they stay close, the bands weave into one bright braid of motion. As they separate, the trails no longer cross, and each path reads as a solo. You might ask why we do not just add collapse and keep life simpler. Adding special collapse rules complicates the story instead of cleaning it. It demands an extra switch that flips when you look, yet never explains the wiring. Many Worlds removes the switch and keeps the wiring uniform from atoms to you. The price is accepting many non-interacting outcomes, which some find conceptually heavy. The payoff is coherence, fewer arbitrary rules, and predictions that match what labs already report. You might feel a tug toward stranger ideas like quantum immortality right now. Hold that thought, because it is a philosophical add-on rather than core physics. We will treat it later as a thought experiment about identity and risk, not a promise. Before we leave the quantum lane, anchor one final definition in plain speech. The universal wave function is simply the grand pattern describing everything together at once. No mystery lives in the term. It is a book of moves written for the whole dance floor. You may ask whether the book requires a reader to make the dance real. The answer here is kinder and simpler than that old worry suggests. Reality does its steps regardless, while observers are just parts of the choreography keeping time. Think about memory as a kind of notebook you carry through scenes. When decoherence locks an outcome, your notebook gains ink that cannot be erased locally. Another notebook with different ink exists, but it sits on a shelf you cannot reach. You might test your intuition with a decision you will make today. In one branch, you accept a job. In another, you decline it respectfully. Both outcomes fit the rules, yet each future notebook holds one clean, continuous narrative. That brings us to identity without ghosts and agency without drama. You do not need to control all branches to shape the one you inhabit. Decision theory still guides you, because weights tell you which bets make coherent sense. Imagine you are choosing a route through a forest with many forks. You cannot walk them all, but a good map tilts you towards safer ground. The map is probability weight, and your steps are still yours to place. You might ask whether branching cheapens, meaning by diluting each personal story. The opposite often happens, meaning grows when you realize choices sculpt real, lasting histories. Each branch is a whole world for its inhabitants, not a flimsy draft. Keep an eye on evidence, because curiosity without tests drifts into fantasy. Experiments that preserve interference in bigger objects push the boundary of classical behavior. The more we see, the less reason we have to postulate abrupt, special collapses. You might hear that. Consciousness itself causes collapse when it observes. That suggestion moves the mystery, rather than solving it, into a foggier box. A cleaner view treats awareness as a physical process that also decoheres and records. Think of awareness like a camera with grain that becomes part of the film. The scene imprints on both the subject and the camera's sensor patterns. After that imprint, alternatives fade from view because the sensor keeps a one-story record. You deserve one more sturdy image before we widen our scope to the cosmos. Picture a library where every decisive event shelves a new volume with fresh ink. You can browse one aisle, but the other books remain real for their readers. You might worry that infinite libraries make sloppy science by allowing anything. Scientific discipline survives by weighting shelves according to the written rules. Outcomes with tiny weight still exist, yet you rationally plan for those with heavier ink. When skeptics ask why we never meet our other readers, nod in agreement. Non-interaction is the point, enforced by decoherence, which prevents mixed sentences from reappearing. You and the nearby air have conspired to keep narratives clean and stable. Think of two orchestras rehearsing in rooms with perfect soundproofing walls. Each plays a complete symphony, full of meaning for every seated musician, yet no note from one room can bleed into the other without breaking the walls. You might ask, what would finally falsify this branch? First, picture responsibly. If a controlled experiment ever required an actual collapse trigger to match data, it would hurt many worlds. We would then favor whichever framework cleanly predicted that new behavior. Until then, the smallest systems keep behaving like patterns that settle by spreading information. You can build mental models that respect that flow and still feel human. Curiosity becomes a habit of asking where the information goes and what it locks. With that foundation set, we can look up from labs to the sky. You will see a second road to parallel universes that begins with expansion. Hold the image of branching nearby, because it will rhyme with the cosmic story. Building on branching, we turn our eyes to the sky for a second road. You will see how the early universe, expanding like rising dough, can naturally produce many separate cosmic neighborhoods. You can start with inflation, which here simply means a very brief burst of runaway expansion. In plain speech, space itself stretched faster than light without breaking relativity, because nothing moved through space. The fabric just gained more room everywhere at once. You might wonder why physicists invoke such a dramatic idea. Inflation solves three quiet puzzles at once. Why space looks almost perfectly uniform, why distant regions share one temperature, and why overall geometry seems flat rather than curved like a saddle. Think of inflation like smoothing a wrinkled sheet by pulling at all edges at once. When the sheet stretches, little hills and valleys flatten, tiny defects spread thin, and what remains looks even across a huge span you can barely see. In many models, you will find the same physics that starts inflation also makes it hard to stop everywhere. That persistence is called eternal inflation, meaning some regions finish and cool into bubble universes, while other regions keep stretching and birthing more bubbles. You can picture popcorn in an extremely hot pan. Kernels pop into airy pieces at different moments, and the oil between them keeps roiling. Each popped piece is like a finished universe, warm at first, then cooling enough to form matter and light. When a region finishes inflation, it reheats, which here just means stored energy becomes particles and radiation. You could, in principle, detect, in everyday terms, potential energy in the stretching process converts into a bath of hot stuff everywhere inside that bubble. The afterglow of that hot beginning in our bubble is called the cosmic microwave background. You can think of it as faint fossil light stretched into microwaves by expansion, carrying a baby picture of the universe when it was a few 100,000 years old. If clear, gently paced science helps you think straighter, tap like now. So this kind of work reaches more curious minds. It costs nothing and tells the algorithm that careful explanations are worth surfacing. You may ask, what would reveal other bubbles if they do not share space with us? One possibility is a past collision, leaving a circular bruise pattern in the baby picture, a subtle ring where temperatures deviate slightly from the otherwise smooth background. Searches for such bruises have been careful and creative, and so far inconclusive. That mix specific predictions plus humility is how you and I keep wonder honest, because we say exactly what a multiverse would need to leave behind to be noticed. You could also look for statistics that seem strange in the background's tiny ripples. If the pattern of hot and cold spots departs from the simplest random story, some models of bubble formation get a small, testable chance to speak up. You might picture rolling paint onto a wall and seeing faint circular swirls where a roller overlapped. Most of the wall is smooth, yet the swirls carry a memory of how the paint spread. Likewise, the baby picture could hide faint memories of earlier collisions. You deserve a plain definition of a bubble universe before we wander further. A bubble here is a cosmic region that stopped inflating, cooled, and developed its own internal history, possibly with slightly different particle details or constants than ours. You might worry that different constants sounds like unfalsifiable fantasy. The scientific footing is narrower. Models predict families of possibilities, and we test the ones that change the baby picture or later galaxy patterns enough to measure with instruments. Keep your agency strong as we weigh claims. If a prediction draws a crisp line on the sky or a sharp statistical fingerprint, you and I can decide what would count as confirmation, what as disproof, and what remains an open, honest question. You can hear an elegant rhyme with many worlds that is worth naming out loud. In quantum stories, interactions separate branches that stop interfering. In cosmology, expansion separates bubbles whose signals cannot catch up, leaving them effectively non-talking worlds in the same grand space. Think of a shoreline at low tide splitting into tidal pools. You can picture each pool hosting its own mini ecosystem once the water level falls, even though all pools belong to the same coast. Similarly, separated bubbles carry their own histories once light cannot bridge them. You may ask whether bubbles ever collide late and create fireworks worth seeing now. The practical answer is that late collisions would likely be rare and violent, and our careful sky maps show no obvious scars demanding that explanation. Another question you might hold is why we talk about faster-than-light expansion at all. Expansion faster than light. is about new space appearing between distant points. Nothing outruns a photon locally, so relativity's speed limit stays safe in every neighborhood. Here is a friendly way to visualize it without equations. Imagine little ants walking on an expanding rubber band. No ant sprints faster than its tiny legs allow, yet distant ants separate quickly because the band itself is stretching under all their feet. Observationally, your best anchors are humble: background maps, galaxy surveys, and polarization patterns in that fossil light. Polarization simply means a preferred wiggle direction of light waves, which can carry fingerprints from early gravitational waves or other processes. If the earliest universe rang with gravitational waves, the background's polarization could show a curling pattern. Early claims of such a signal faded when dust in our own galaxy mimicked the effect, reminding us that nature loves to rhyme and sometimes to tease. That setback was healthy science doing its job in public. You gain confidence not from flashy announcements, but from patient cross-checks, better instruments, and predictions that survive when we shine brighter, kinder light on the same stubborn questions. You might wonder how probabilities work in a landscape of many possible bubbles. A practical approach treats our observations as one draw from a large lottery and asks which models make that draw typical rather than outrageously rare. Think of sampling cookies from many batches baked by slightly different recipes. If your cookie's texture and chips match a broad swath of recipes, the recipe family stays plausible. If only a razor-thin setting works, the story starts to look contrived. This leads to a thorny topic called the measure problem, which here just means how to count possibilities fairly across an endless or growing set. In simple speech, we need rules for comparing infinities so that typical gains a sensible meaning. We will not dodge the difficulty, and you do not need ornate math to sense it. Anytime a model hands you endless options, you ask how sampling works, how observers like us are weighted, and what predictions stay stable under different counting schemes. Notice how this echoes our earlier talk about branch weights in the quantum story. Whether branches or bubbles, we keep tying probability to expectations for future observations, so that betting advice and instrument design still make coherent, testable sense. A fair objection you might raise is this: if bubbles are causally separate, are we really doing science? The answer is yes, when models of the larger picture leave clear imprints on the piece we can see, like boundary conditions shaping a novel's first chapter. Imagine you reading the opening page of a mystery and already inferring the house has many locked rooms. Even without visiting them, scuff marks on the floor and keys on the table constrain the floor plan. Your sky plays the role of that well-written first page. Keep your skepticism warm but not scalding. You and I can hold wonder in one hand and demand for evidence in the other, letting each guide the other so curiosity stays brave while claims stay honest. On the evidence front, you will see improved background maps sharpen the baby picture every few years. Each upgrade tests inflation's predictions about flatness, near uniformity, and the spectrum of tiny ripples that seed galaxies, tightening the room for alternatives that lack those features. You might ask whether a multiverse explains too much by allowing every outcome somewhere. That worry weakens if the framework restricts what is frequent versus fantastically rare, and if those frequency claims can be checked by the single universe we inhabit. You can think of genetics predicting common traits without listing every possible face. The model earns trust by getting the statistics of real populations right, not by enumerating every individual. Cosmology must earn trust in the same quiet, statistical way. You will notice another elegant rhyme between the two stories worth holding: decoherence in quantum theory and cosmic expansion. Both scatter information so alternatives no longer interfere. which makes separate narratives durable without demanding any supernatural barriers. In everyday life, you have seen how distance and noise preserve different conversations at a busy park. Groups spread out, chatter overlaps less, and each circle builds its own thread. Bubbles are like those groups carried to a cosmic scale by relentless stretching. Your role here is not passive. You can interrogate claims like a careful editor. Ask which parameters a model truly needs, what it predicts next, and which observations could surprise it enough that we would revise or retire the idea. When you hold models to that standard, you become an ally to working scientists. We are all trying to map a coastline in fog, and good questions are like lighthouses that keep our bearings true while we probe unfamiliar inlets with patient instruments. You may be curious whether other bubbles could host chemistry or life with different constants. The modest answer is that some changes ruin the recipe, while others still bake. The best we can do is compute which ranges keep stars, molecules, and time to evolve. You can think of making bread with salt, yeast, and water. Too little yeast and nothing rises. Too much salt and yeast struggles. Yet a band of mixtures still yields a loaf, and some natural landscapes may land inside that life-friendly band. We should state the ethical boundary clearly, because stakes can be emotional. Speculation about other lives should never distract from caring for this world. Your agency matters most in the neighborhood you can touch, where your choices have immediate, measurable effects. Still, the perspective can be empowering rather than numbing. Realizing that existence may be generous with possibilities can ease perfectionism and invite you to make bold, compassionate choices in the branch and bubble you actually inhabit. Before we close this cosmic lane, you can tuck away a crisp summary. Inflation smooths and seeds. Structure. Eternal inflation, if true, keeps spawning bubbles. Evidence would show up as background patterns or subtle scars. And your job is to test disciplined predictions, not wishful images. With that, we can cross-compare the quantum and cosmic paths you now hold. You will notice they share a logic of separation through ordinary physical processes, which keeps wonder grounded as we head toward deeper questions about evidence and meaning. Holding the twin stories together, we now ask how they really earn trust. You will see how evidence, probability, and identity keep both feet on solid ground without dimming wonder. You might start with a blunt question that keeps scientists honest. What would make either pathway stumble so clearly that you and I would retire it with gratitude? In the quantum lane, a stumble would be an unmistakable, repeatable need for a special collapse mechanism. If careful experiments forced us to add a new switch that flips on observation, the branch-first picture would lose its simplest virtue. In the cosmic lane, a stumble would be sky maps that contradict inflation's gentle predictions. If the baby picture flatly refused the smoothness, flatness, and seed patterns expansion expects, eternal growth would become a poor storyteller. You deserve a crisp way to compare claims that live at different scales. Think of a courthouse that weighs two cases by the same standards of evidence, even when one is about a stolen bicycle and the other a bank. Methods, not drama, carry the day. Probability is the shared courtroom rule, but it needs a humane translation. In plain speech, probability tells you how to set expectations before you look, and how to place fair bets that your future self will not regret. Many worlds asks you to tie probability to what a future memory is likely to record. The heavier a branch, the more often versions of you will write that outcome in their notebooks, so betting follows the thickest ink. You might worry, this sounds circular, like saying likely things are likely. The rescue is decision theory, which here just means rules for making choices that avoid guaranteed losses across many trials. Picture a fair casino where bad strategies bleed you slowly, even when any single round feels fine. A strategy that respects branch weights avoids shore. Loss traps, the way good budgeting avoids a leak that sinks you month by month. In cosmology, probability wears a different but related coat called typicality. Typicality simply means you expect to observe conditions that are common in the model's family, not rare outliers that strain the story. You can picture a museum guide planning a tour. If a floor plan predicts one giant gallery and many tiny closets, you expect most visitors to report the gallery, not a broom cupboard. Our sky is the visitor report we hold in our hands. A thorn appears when the model allows endlessly many rooms. This is the measure problem again, the task of counting fairly so that common means something testable rather than wordplay. You and I can keep it grounded by demanding stability. If a prediction flips wildly when you tweak perfectly reasonable counting rules, the claim is fragile. If it stays calm across sensible measures, the claim earns confidence. Identity enters now, not as a ghost, but as a bookkeeping choice. A clear self is a continuous thread of memories and goals. That thread lets you evaluate risks in your neighborhood without cataloging unreachable shelves. You might ask whether a thread that can split still deserves the name. It does, because each continuation preserves the past up to the split and then writes new pages. You never experience being both pages at once, only your own line of ink. Think of a hiking path that forks around a fallen tree. Each route carries the same steps until the fork, then new views. You remain the hiker on one trail, not a blurry ghost stretched across both clear footpaths. A practical objection says, probability loses meaning if all outcomes occur. Your answer is that meaning lives in guidance, not in cosmic bookkeeping. Probability guides your present choices toward outcomes your near future is most likely to report. Cosmology faces a cousin objection, that a multiverse explains everything and therefore nothing. You tame that by testing frequency claims about what skies are typical, and by checking whether alternatives can match the same tight pattern with fewer assumptions. The word typical can hide a trap called self-locating uncertainty. That phrase just means you ask, among many places you could find yourself, which one you should expect to actually occupy before you open your eyes. Picture arriving early at a stadium with many identical entrances. Without further clues, you expect to be at a common gate, not a locked service door. Models that make your observed gate wildly unlikely begin to wobble. This is where simple, transparent priors help. A prior is a starting expectation before data. If two models begin with modest priors and one needs fewer special settings to match your sky, it earns the nod. You might ask how philosophy and physics stay in friendly lanes. The pact is that philosophy clarifies meanings and decision rules, while physics supplies numbers and maps. Neither replaces the other, and both answer to evidence. Consider a chess coach and a stopwatch. The coach explains plans and trade-offs. The watch measures your speed. Together, they help you win more games than either alone, and neither one pretends to be the other. Ethics quietly flows from these choices in surprising ways. When you realize many outcomes exist, kindness becomes a local commitment, not a cosmic tally. You improve the page you can write, which is the only page you can feel. You might fear that branching cheapens sacrifice. In lived experience, it does the opposite, because costs and care register fully on your trail, where people you love read the same ink and feel the same weight. Back to evidence with a steady hand, you can look for scaling successes. If quantum interference keeps showing up in larger, warmer, messier systems, you reduce the wiggle room for hidden collapse without special pleading. Imagine a photographer steadily lengthening exposures while still avoiding blur. Each sharp image under tougher conditions increases faith in the tripod, lens, and technique. Likewise, coherent patterns under stress strengthen the branch-first lens. On the sky side, you watch polarization maps and galaxy surveys grow cleaner. Each refinement either keeps fitting inflation's quiet expectations or starts to push them off balance, and either outcome teaches us something precious. You might ask whether we could ever see a neighbor bubble directly. The sober answer is that causal separation forbids ordinary signals, so we rely on fossils in the background, light or improbable statistics that point to a larger backstage. Think of studying a forest from a single clearing. You can still infer storms, fires, and animal paths from stumps, ash, and tracks. You never see the whole forest, yet you read its history honestly from reachable clues. A tempting detour is quantum immortality, the claim that you always continue in branches where you survive. We must mark it clearly as a philosophical thought experiment about identity and risk, not a laboratory prediction about safety. If you value rigorous wonder without the hype, subscribe and stay with us. You will get steady explanations, slow-motion pacing, and honest updates when evidence changes the map. You and I can defang it by asking a humble question. Would adopting this belief change rational bets in repeatable experiments? Or does it only play with words about future memory? If it cannot guide action, it belongs in the library of ideas, not the toolbox. Another magnet for confusion is consciousness as a magical collapse button. A more grounded picture treats awareness as a physical process that records and decoheres like any other, noble but not outside the dance. Think of a musician listening while playing. The listening shapes the performance, yet the sound follows the same acoustics that govern every instrument on stage. No special physics wakes up, only for the soloist's thoughts. You may wonder how confirmation bias can sneak into grand theories. It creeps in when we celebrate suggestive alignments and ignore silent misses, so we keep pre-registering predictions and inviting rivals to design the sharpest tests. A practical habit helps here. Before looking at data, write down what would count as a meaningful surprise and what would be a shrug. Then your future self has a contract to honor instead of a memory to edit. Communication matters too, because metaphors can quietly mislead. We avoid speaking as if bubbles float inside a pre-existing air, or as if branches are paper copies. We return to the precise ideas of separation by decoherence and by expansion. You can picture language like a carpenter's square. A slightly crooked tool builds a house that looks fine until doors refuse to close. Straight language keeps the frame true, so later rooms actually fit. Let us tighten the comparison now. Quantum branching preserves the same equations everywhere and denies special collapse. Inflationary bubbles preserve general relativity and add a plausible engine for early smoothing and seeding. You hold a matched pair of disciplined stories that explain durable separations without magic. One relies on information spreading, the other on space stretching, and both ask for evidence where it must live rather than where it is easy to imagine. What about simplicity? The quiet judge behind the bench. Simplicity here means fewer special switches, fewer emergency patches, and predictions that generalize gracefully. Both stories earn points whenever they remove knobs without losing accuracy. You might worry, simplicity punishes creativity. It does not. It rewards ideas that do more with less, like a clean proof or a well-designed bridge that stands with fewer exotic parts yet tolerates storms. A final pragmatic lens is fecundity, the capacity to generate new tests. A good framework spawns many specific, risky predictions. A weak one spawns only slogans that survive anything and therefore teach us nothing. You and I can check fecundity by listing concrete bets. Bigger interference devices, sharper background maps, and cross-checks with independent instruments all put weight on the scale where claims must earn their keep. Think of a garden that keeps offering chances to prune, graft, and harvest. A living theory invites work that can go right or wrong in public. A lifeless one only tells stories to itself and never gets dirt on its hands. Before we widen to meaning, hold a quiet synthesis. Separation without mysticism, probability as guidance, identity as continuous memory, and evidence as repeatable strain tests are enough to carry you through the fog with a real compass. You might feel a calm kind of awe in that clarity. When large ideas shrink to tools you can hold, your agency grows because you now know where to stand and which levers actually move something you can touch. With that footing, we can finally ask what these stories do to our sense of meaning. We will explore how wonder and responsibility coexist when existence may be generous far beyond our little street. With both paths on the table, you and I can ask what they do to your day-to-day sense of meaning. We will keep our grip on evidence while opening space for wonder that still helps you act. You might fear that a branching world shrinks significance, as if choices blur into static. The opposite happens when you notice each decision writes durable ink in one unfolding notebook, which is the only place you can read your life. Think of steering a canoe down a braided river. You cannot paddle every channel, yet your strokes still choose a current. And that current carries real shores, real campsites, and real mornings that only your route will ever see. You may ask whether responsibility thins out if countless versions of you exist. Responsibility thickens, because each nearby future you must live with the results of today's habits, and those futures are weighted by how often they will actually be experienced. Picture planting a small orchard. You will not taste fruit from every graft, but the varieties you choose most often are the ones you will harvest in season, and pruning today shapes the baskets your future self will carry home. Another worry whispers that effort loses meaning if luck also branches. You keep meaning safe by anchoring it to what you can control: your preparation, your kindness, your refusal to outsource care, just because possibility is generous elsewhere. Imagine cooking for friends with a pantry. You cannot see fully. You still wash the vegetables, stir with attention, and check seasoning. You do not shrug and hope another kitchen saves the meal, because this table is where mouths and memories live. What about grief in a world with many outcomes? Grief remains honest, because the person you miss is missing here, and love is local. Compassion does not dilute across invisible shelves. It concentrates in the room where hands are empty. Think of a lighthouse during fog. Many ships may exist beyond your horizon, but the beam you keep steady matters to the vessels within its reach, and those are the lives your light can actually guide through rocks. You might ask whether meaning depends on being the only copy. It does not. Meaning depends on continuity of memory and on chosen goals. The way a melody keeps identity even when many instruments can play it with heart. Picture a choir holding a simple tune. Multiple voices sing the same line. Yet for each singer, the breath, the posture, and the intention are personal. Your meaning lives where your breath meets your note, not in a census of distant choirs. Ethics grows sturdier when you frame it as local stewardship under cosmic humility. You cannot audit the universe, but you can keep promises, reduce harm you can see, and build systems that keep helping even when you are not watching. Think of trail work in a park you love. You clear drainage, set small stones, and leave wayfinding markers. Hikers you will never meet, walk safer because you tended one muddy bend, and that bend is exactly where your boots could stand. You may worry that choice feels scripted if physics runs smoothly under the hood. Agency survives because outcomes depend on information you provide through goals and attention. Your policies steer which path you inhabit, like code guiding a rover across rough ground. Consider how you budget time. The calendar does not collapse into one inevitable itinerary. Instead, gentle rules nudge you toward some days rather than others, and your choices decide which gentle nudges get to write real meetings and real walks. Purpose often hides in the smallest repeatable actions. If you practice tiny courtesies, you multiply branches where gratitude echoes back, and the echo is not mystical. It is the ordinary consequence of habits making specific futures more common. Think of oiling a wooden table. Each pass soaks a little deeper, and the surface becomes richer and more resilient. Consistent care does not need heroics. It only needs direction and repetition that compound into tangible, touchable results. You might ask, where hope lives when the cosmos may be vast, beyond counting. Hope lives in the line between what you can influence and what you can admire. You act where hands reach, and you marvel where eyes reach, and both are honest. Picture standing under a dark sky after rain. You cannot rearrange constellations, but you can share a blanket, pour warm tea, and learn the names of stars with a child. In that circle of light, awe and comfort become the same gesture. A practical question follows: how do you make decisions when branches multiply? You adopt policies that would serve you well across many plausible mornings, emphasizing robustness over brittle perfection and kindness over short, sharp winds. Think like a climber packing for changeable weather. Layers beat a single heavy coat, and steady hydration beats heroic sprinting. Policies that travel well across conditions will also travel well across branches you cannot fully forecast. You may feel drawn to stories that promise guaranteed survival. We must mark those stories as thought experiments about identity rather than safety advice. Rational care still wears a seatbelt and still calls a friend when roads get icy. Imagine a pilot reviewing checklists even on sunny days. Confidence comes from habits that tolerate surprises, not from believing clouds cannot form. In the same way, good branches bloom most often under cultures that normalize preparation and kindness. Meaning also grows where curiosity meets discipline. You test ideas gently against the world, update without shame, and keep a notebook that records both wins and misses, so future you can learn with less friction and more grace. Think of a garden journal beside the trowel. You log what sprouted, what failed, and which shade cloth helped during heat. Next season's harvest is not luck alone. It is memory turned into better guesses and steadier hands. You might ask how awe fits without turning mystical. Awe is a posture of attention that widens perspective and softens the ego, the way stepping back from a painting lets you see structure the brushstrokes hid at nose range. Picture watching a flock wheel at dusk. Patterns appear that no single bird intends, and your chest loosens with the recognition that small rules can weave astonishing fabrics. You leave humbler, kinder, and paradoxically more ready to help. Responsibility and joy can share a bench. When you act from care rather than fear, effort becomes lighter because you are rowing with the current of what you value most, instead of fighting eddies of approval you cannot control. Think of tuning a bicycle you ride every day. A little grease, trued wheels, and correct tire pressure make the same commute feel like flying. Your personal values work the same way, turning everyday choices into something that feels right and flows smoothly. You may wonder how to talk about this perspective with people you love. Start with shared senses, the relief of honesty, the beauty of patient craft, and the comfort of taking turns to rest. Abstractions come later, when the cake has cooled. Imagine building a bookshelf together. You square the corners, check the level, and admire the grain. When the shelf holds real weight, the theory of joinery has already done its work and smiles quietly from inside the wood. A deeper question: what does forgiveness look like in a branching world? It looks like releasing your grip on ghostly alternatives and tending the one conversation in front of you, where apologies land and future pages can be written differently. Think of reheating a sauce that's stuck. You lower the flame, add a little water, and stir gently. You do not scold the pan for every past dinner. You rescue tonight's meal and set tomorrow's technique on kinder footing. You might ask how to carry grief and hope at once. You carry them by giving each its proper home. Grief honors what was real. Hope commits to what can be real next, and both are forms of love pointed in different directions. Picture a well with two buckets. One draws memories that quench a particular ache. The other draws plans that water seedlings. You do not confuse the buckets, and the garden needs both to stay alive through seasons. Here is a gentle compass for work that matters. Choose projects whose effects compound quietly, whose risks are shared fairly, and whose benefits remain even if your name fades. Those are the paths that age well across many mornings. Think of restoring a creek with native plants. Floods still come, but the banks hold better. The water runs clearer, and fish return. Your fingerprints wash away while your choices keep singing in the health of the stream. If awe now rises in your chest, let us honor it without hurry. Breathe once and picture the same equations, stitching electrons in your tea. The same expansion, lifting galaxies like lanterns, and your small kindnesses rippling through rooms you can touch. You stand at the crossing of the tiny and the vast, and none of it demands a miracle beyond patience and attention. The world is generous with patterns, and you are capable of meeting them with craft and care. Let that feeling settle like dew on cool grass. When it fades, as feelings do, the tools remain. Ask precise questions, check consequences, and choose policies that leave places and people stronger than you found them. You may ask how to keep from drifting into abstraction again. Keep a short list on paper. What you can do this week for your health, your craft, and your circle, and what you will stop doing that drains those three wells. Think like a careful editor trimming a draft. You cut sentences that repeat. You choose verbs that move, and you keep the paragraph that finally says something true. Meaning often emerges, not from more words, but from fewer, chosen well. Community gives these ideas traction. When groups normalize clear language, practical kindness, and fair tests, branches with better outcomes become common, and narratives that once felt fragile start to feel trustworthy in ordinary daylight. Picture a workshop where people share tools and notes. Projects improve because usage spreads wisdom, and the shop itself becomes safer and brighter. Culture is the hidden jig that keeps the cut straight when hands grow tired. You might wonder how art fits in a careful cosmos. Art trains attention and enlarges empathy, two faculties that keep science honest and relationships humane. A sonata or a sketch can teach you how to notice without rushing to conclude. Think of tracing a leaf's veins with a pencil. The more faithfully you observe, the more astonishing the ordinary becomes, and the more likely you are to treat both the leaf and the hand that holds it with respect. Gratitude is not a passive mood here, it is an action plan. You thank mentors by mentoring. You thank the planet by repairing. You thank luck by building systems that share safety and opportunity more widely than chance would. Imagine a community tool library. You return the drill sharpened, you label the bits, and you add a small guide. Gratitude turns into infrastructure, and infrastructure quietly bends futures toward fewer avoidable scrapes. Before we close this chapter, hold one quiet sentence you can carry. You make meaning by aligning attention with kindness inside the constraints of an elegant, testable world, and that alignment scales from washing a mug to drafting a policy. With that sentence pocketed, we can move to a final synthesis. You will see how to weigh the two pathways side by side, how to keep evidence at center, and how to leave with a map you can actually use tomorrow morning. With that in mind, we can weave the thread you have been holding into one clear map. You will see how to weigh two disciplined pictures, make bets you will not regret, and leave with steps that fit ordinary days. You can think of these pictures like two charts for the same coast. One chart shows hidden currents under a calm surface. The other shows sandbars that rise and split the water. You navigate best when you consult both before you shove off. On the quantum side, you learned that interactions disperse information until alternatives stop interfering. On the cosmic side, you saw stretching space pull regions apart until signals cannot catch up. Both are separations built by ordinary physics, not by mystical walls. Your scorecard for trust starts with 3 quiet judges. Simplicity asks for fewer special switches. Fecundity asks for more crisp tests next. And stability asks predictions to survive small nudges to assumptions without wobbling wildly. Under that scorecard, branching without collapse fares well because it removes an ad hoc trigger and fits the lab record. Eternal inflation fares cautiously well because it explains smoothness and seeds but still owes us clearer fossil marks. You might ask, which single observation would most reshape your view tomorrow morning? A lab result that forces an honest collapse mechanism, or a sky map that refuses inflation's gentle fingerprints would move the needle quickly and with gratitude. Think of a bridge inspection that finds a crack exactly where a simple design predicted none. You do not argue with steel. You repair the model, and you learn something that makes every later bridge safer for real people crossing. In practice, you will likely see incremental strain rather than a single dramatic snap. Larger interference devices, warmer environments kept coherent a little longer, and cross-checked background maps sharpen the picture bit by bit until alternatives lose excuses. So how do you carry probability out of the lab and into your kitchen table decisions? You treat it as guidance for future memories, favoring policies that keep your near-future self-reporting outcomes. You would choose again under the same information. Picture choosing a commute that tolerates rain and detours rather than a brittle shortcut. The robust route wins across many mornings, the way branch-respecting bets win across many repeats, even when any single day feels ordinary. You may worry that talking about other bubbles invites anything goes storytelling. You tame that by asking where the story touches the one sky we can see, and by checking whether rival ideas can match the same detail with fewer moving parts. A fair move now is to write 2 short lists on paper. On one, claims with crisp imprints to chase. On the other, beautiful metaphors with no steering power. You fund, share, and teach from the first, and you enjoy the second without confusing it for a compass. Communication is part of the science because words lay rails for thought. When you and I stop saying that observation magically collapses or that bubbles float in a pre-existing air, we keep the rails straight for the next careful sentence. You can use kinder metaphors that stay honest and helpful. Decoherence is like voices drifting far apart until harmonies cannot blend. And inflation is like dough rising until pockets no longer share steam. Both make separation without ghostly gates. Your role does not end at understanding. It begins there. You can become the person in your circle who asks for pre-registered predictions, celebrates clean null results, and refuses to trade awe for vagueness or certainty for slogans. Think of a neighbor who brings a voltage tester to a group repair day. They do not make speeches. They quietly prevent shocks, confirm connections, and leave the room safer. Good questions and fair standards work the same slow magic in conversations. When disagreements surface, you can keep the temperature kind and the standard high. Ask, what observation would you expect next if you are right, and what would make you change your mind? Then write the answers where both sides can find them later. You might ask what to do with ideas that lure anxiety, like dramatic versions of quantum immortality. You label them as thought experiments about identity and risk. Then you return your steering wheel to policies that measurably improve tomorrow's lives. Picture the way pilots treat rumors about weather. They note the rumor, then consult instruments and forecasts, and they keep checklists that save strangers. Wonder is welcome on the flight deck, but safety flies on procedures that work. Let us write a pocket guide you can carry. 1. Favor models that remove special switches. 2. Ask for specific, risky predictions. 3. Track what would change your mind. 4. Invest in habits whose benefits compound even if you never claim credit. You can test the guide this week without equations. Choose one small practice that increases coherence in your life. Sleep, walking, honest notebooks, and watch how many branches of your near future get steadier when a single lever moves. Think of aligning a telescope that was slightly off. The whole sky grows sharper after one quiet adjustment, not because the stars change, but because your tool meets them with less wobble and more care. Back to the science. Your near-term expectation is progress by patience. Instruments refine sensitivity. Laboratories hold coherence longer, and theory trims unnecessary decorations. Step by step, the room for collapse. Only stories keeps narrowing, unless data demands them. On the sky, you watch for polarization patterns and anomalies that stay put under brighter scrutiny. When dust explains a signal, you smile and learn. When a pattern survives every cleaning, you listen harder. In both outcomes, honesty wins. You might ask how to talk about uncertainty without sounding timid. You can borrow a mountain guide's tone, firm about the map, frank about the weather, and always ready to turn back if the ridge starts to ice over. Picture taping that tone by your desk. It reminds you to share confidence intervals with the same warmth you share. Good news, because humility and excitement make better teammates than either one alone. A lovely symmetry appears when you step back. The same mathematics that keeps cats coherent in thought experiments also keeps galaxies honest in background light, and your life sits exactly between those scales like a well-tuned bridge. That bridge metaphor earns one more step. A strong span flexes instead of snapping. Distributing loads through many fibers, your worldview can flex the same way. Distributing curiosity through many tests without breaking under a single failed guess. If you feel doubt tug, treat it as a friend asking for clearer instructions. Doubt is a tool, not a mood. Give it a job. What to look for, when to report back, and it will stop chewing your thoughts and start helping your work. Think of a young dog that relaxes after you give it a task. Fetch becomes a focused game, and the restless energy turns into joyful motion. Your doubt can be trained the same way with lists and dates. You might wonder whether we will ever know the multiverse with the same calm we know atoms. Perhaps not, and that is fine. We can still build instruments that shave ignorance, and we can still speak plainly about what remains unknown. The point is not to conquer mystery, but to collaborate with it. Mystery sets the questions, evidence sets the pace, kindness sets the tone. Together, they make a practice that ages well across branches and bubbles alike. Let us bring the threads together gently. Quantum branching removes special collapse and explains lab patterns. Cosmic inflation explains smoothness and seeds while asking for clearer fossils. Both reward patience, both invite precise bets, and both leave room for wonder that works. So, which picture deserves your trust today? The honest answer is that you trust both. According to earned weight, high for branch first lab work, cautious hopeful for eternal inflation, and flexible enough to change if data smiles in a different direction. You can leave with a pledge that fits on a sticky note. I will ask for predictions before applause. I will prefer fewer switches over more. I will track what would change my mind, and I will keep care at the center of my choices. Think of how that pledge would shift: a classroom, a lab, or a kitchen. Conversations would cool, curiosity would warm, and outcomes would tilt toward futures where people sleep better because they understand a little more and pretend a little less. If a calm awe rises now, let it glow without rush. You are standing where equations braid with stories, where a cup of tea holds quantum whispers, and where the night sky hums with patient light from unimaginably far. Breathe once and picture your next kind habit, your next precise question, and your next fair test. Those are the ways you meet a generous universe on steady feet and leave your small corner better lit than you found it. When the feeling fades, as feelings always do, the tools remain. You know how to weigh claims, how to steer under uncertainty, and how to build meaning from attention plus kindness inside an elegant, testable world. For a calm sequel, continue with our exploration of quantum immortality. It pairs neatly with today's map. And thank you for being here. Curiosity grows stronger when we learn in public together. We have walked from coins to cosmos and kept our language clear. Carry that clarity into conversations, into choices, and into the quiet craft of the life you are already shaping, page by page, morning by morning. Thank you for your attention and your good questions. Stay curious, stay gentle with evidence, and let your next experiment be a kind one that someone else could repeat and learn from with a smile.